Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. We are very happy to announce our speaker, Petra Bayr, who is a member of the European Parliament and the head of the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights, which is a mouthful, but very impressive initiative. And I think what we're going to start with is a little speech that you can give us to introduce yourself and your work. Would that be all right with you?
Mm-hmm. Of course. I think I will focus on sexual and reproductive rights and health and rights. I use the term SRHR, so just for everybody who's not familiar with this acronym, Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, SRHR. And I'm now member of the Austrian National Assembly for nearly 21 years. And when I was brand new, I had the opportunity to attend a conference in Addis Ababa in February 2003 on female genital mutilation. It was organized by the Inter-African Committee was the name exactly, and the conference was called Zero Tolerance on FGM, and that was the conference where the 6th of February was proclaimed as International Day Against Female Genital Mutilation. And back in Austria, I thought, what can I do in Austria? Because we know that also in Austria, not a lot, but of course, FGM is also a problem here. And so I founded a platform, Stop FGM, enshrining all organizations and individuals who were at this time, when it was not very well known, but already active on combating FGM. And since then, we have a web page, stopfgm.net, and we give press conferences every February around the International Day, and look what we can do in combating FGM also in Austria. And I also have to mention another NGO platform before I start with the more formalized politics I do. I also founded, which exists in other countries as well. It's the so-called Mother's Night, Mutternacht, and it's celebrated on the eve before Mother's Day, and it commemorates all these women who die when being pregnant or giving birth. 99% of them in developing countries. And that's more an issue, what we can do with our development cooperation money and with our priorities in development cooperation, how we can combat maternal mortality and mortality of newborns and little children. Yes, and that's also quite a broad platform with a lot of Austrian NGOs being active wherever in this world and focusing on maternal mortality and sexual health and reproductive health in general. Yeah, so that's the informal things I do. And I'm also president. I start elsewhere. We in the Austrian National Assembly and in the Austrian Parliament, we do not have any tradition on caucuses. That means multi-party groups dealing with one issue. We only have one, and that's now, I think, about 25 years or so. So it exists longer that I'm member of parliament, and that's on sexual and reproductive health. And I joined this group because of my activities on FGM at the beginning. And we renamed ourselves because we were called Development Cooperation and Population and things like that, where nobody understands what it is about. And now we are called Parla and Sex, and I think it's much more on the point and on the top. And I also try to convince UNFPA, which is the World the Population Fund of the United Nations, that they should call themselves UN Sex, because I think that's what it is, and Population Fund is so a little bit nothing. So we called ourselves at least Parla and Sex. And there we are affiliated. We have an NGO, which is our secretariat, the Österreichische Gesellschaft für Familienplanung, the Austrian Association for Family Planning. and they are a member of an umbrella organization, of two umbrella organizations. And one is EPF, the European Parliamentary Forum on Sexual and Reproductive Rights. And because of my activities in the Austrian Parliament in this caucus, I also got in contact with EPF and became board member and became vice chair, and now I'm president since more than 3 years meanwhile. And as EPF, we are doing a much broader work than only on maternal mortality or on FGM. We also focus in general on gender-based violence and on issues where you can compare policies of different countries. And so we make atlases, for instance, an atlas on abortion, an atlas on contraceptives, on fertility, which is a quite new one, but also on HPV prevention, and where we rate countries after different criterias, and then we give them percentage, how good they are doing, how well they are doing, and how whether they reach the goals that we set or not. And then we rate them in different colors. The dark green ones are those who are doing perfect, and the bright green, then the yellow, then the orange, then the red. And we also have a special category for Poland, mostly only, which is dark red. And these atlases have the effect that many countries or politicians from these countries try to compare themselves with their neighboring countries, and then looking, hey, why are they doing better? What are they doing what we are not doing? Why do we perform worse? And so that's a kind of competition which initiates this a positive race to the bottom, and we try to convince that our MPs in all our, I think we have about 35 different all-party or multi-party groups. For instance, in Austria, the far right wing is not member of our group, but all the other parties are. And we are focusing on issues also, of course, at home in our national policy. One of the issues where, for instance, when Corona started, we realized that many ambulances closed because they had no information and no protection gloves and equipment, and also those clinics where you can get an abortion. And of course, an abortion you cannot postpone for after COVID or whatever. And so we saw the important need to improve the situation. And so we tried quite quickly, not quick enough, but quite quickly, nevertheless, to get easy access to pharmaceutical abortion pills, which is allowed in Austria, but you only could get it in hospitals. And as hospitals also were hard to reach during Corona, we changed, even not a law. It wasn't necessary to change a law. It was just a regulation between the pharmaceutical enterprise who offers this pill and Austria, that it's also okay that registered gynecologists can prescribe, give a prescription for these pills. And now you have an easy access. And as Austria has quite an east-west problem when it comes to abortion, so it's quite easy to get an abortion in bigger cities or in Vienna or Lower Austria. But the further you come to the west, the more problematic it is. And we try to get figures now on how many women get these services now by prescribed pills. It's not easy to get it, but we are quite sure that it helps women in the west of Austria to have easy access to abortion. So that's one of the consequences, for instance, that we threw in our National Assembly. But of course, we also always have a focus on what are we doing with our development cooperation, how much can we focus there on SRHR for that reason, and to get become more MPs aware of what impact their development cooperation money can have. We also organize study tours as EPF, where we travel to countries where it's often very tricky, not only when it comes to abortion, but also when it comes to LGBTIQ issues, for instance, in Uganda or in Eastern Africa in general. At the moment, it's totally hard for LGBTIQ persons, both in Uganda and Kenya. They have totally strict laws, and even in Tanzania, where they don't have any laws, there is more and more totally pressure on LGBTIQ persons and activities around that. And so we try to have also, when we go to countries like that, we not only have our official program, we also have quite often an unofficial program, which doesn't appear in any official paper, that we meet also with these people who are totally under stress and totally under pressure, and try to help them with our political means that we have. Yeah, and as a last point, I'm also member not of the European Parliament, but of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is the Great Britain still there. The big Europe, also including Azerbaijan and Turkey and Iceland and many more countries than only the European Union. And there we do not have these very robust possibilities when it comes to laws like the European Union has. We only work with recommendations, but sometimes even our recommendations become international law. For instance, the Istanbul Convention, you will know, as the gold standard for combating violence against women or gender-based violence. And that started in the Parliamentary Assembly 25 years ago or so. And so we also work on issues like related to sexual and reproductive health and rights. And for instance, my first report there was on the access to contraceptives and on comprehensive sexuality education, where I compared countries where I focused on best practice and then worst practice, and where I at the end gave recommendations how people easy can get information and can get access to contraceptives. And my last report related to sexual and reproductive rights was decided last January, which was on sexual violence as a tactic of war, which we saw a lot in Ukraine, committed by Russian soldiers. And it is usually not because a soldier wants to have sex. It's much more really a strategy. And there's a chain of command also responsible for what's going on. And if they do not curb that, and if they cannot give hold to issues like that, they are also responsible for that, because it's a war crime. And it was on this topic and how we can produce evidence, because it's so easy after a war. You can say, okay, this and this and this is destroyed, and that happened. But how do you prove that women were raped or that there was sexual violence against somebody? And so we gave recommendations how countries could support the Ukrainian women which had to flee the country. And what is really remarkable in this report, which was adopted unanimously, is that I say that every country where Ukrainian women flee and they are pregnant from a rape, that they have the right to a legal and safe abortion. And also in Poland, of course. And we know that in Poland, the most refugees came to Poland, and even the Polish MPs were in favor of that. So that's what's quite remarkable. Of course, it's a quite narrow and conditional issue, but nevertheless, to say, okay, abortion also has to be a right in Poland was quite a step at this time. Yeah, so I think that's in a nutshell what I do on SRHR. I do a lot of other issues as well, but that's, I think, what we are focusing on tonight.
That's an impressive career. Thank you so much for giving an overview. We're going to start out with some questions, and then we're going to open the questions to the audience, and everyone can ask what they're interested in. My first question kind of asks about your experience, because obviously you've been in politics for over 20 years and you've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot. In your opinion, do you think that changes in legislation on reproductive rights are only occur if female political leaders are put into position? So can changes in legislation on reproductive rights also occur when men are on the or in male-dominated political upper levels?
I think yes, because when I look at European parliaments, except the Swedish one, which I think has a majority in women, a slight majority, but is a majority. And if I look on these countries in Europe, where there really was progress, and I think the country with the most convincing progress is Ireland, where they not only have legalized abortion, they have legalized same-sex marriage, they have legalized abortion via pharmaceutical abortion via telemedicine. I would like to have that in Austria, and they made it in quite a short time. So they did it in 5 years about this change, and I think that also in Ireland there are more men than women politically active. So yes, I think it's easier if you have more women, but it's not excluded. You cannot say only when women are a majority or have to say that there is progress. Ireland shows that there also can be progress without a majority of women.
And I guess makes you think about the women who aren't doing that progress, like Maloney or so on. But I wanted to ask, kind of on the theme of Maloney, you mentioned the Istanbul Convention, the Council of Europe Convention on domestic violence and gender-based violence. And this is part of this proliferation of recently, where you have had progress, but you've also had regressive anti-gender movements where Turkey withdrew, Croatia's saying, oh, we don't want to change the meaning of marriage. Hungary, Poland are all against the Istanbul Convention, Russia, and this anti-gender pushback to restore the natural order. I wanted to ask if you've done anything in your work that specifically addresses that pushback, so pushing back the pushback, as they say.
Yes, of course I did. But I have to just tell you one episode from Croatia, which totally impressed me. We had a conference in the Croatian Parliament. We, as European Parliamentary Forum, had a conference in Croatia. Originally, it was planned to be held in the parliament, but then, as we were too progressive on some issues, we had to do it in a hotel, or in a
I think you've muted yourself.
Yes, I did.
Okay, yeah.
Reasons ever. But when I got there and took a taxi from the airport to the city center, there was just some weeks ago, before I was there was a case where some juvenile boys raped a girl. And there was a huge debate about violence, gender-based violence. And the taxi driver asked me what I'm doing here, and I told him in brief what I'm doing here. And then he said, I do not know whether you know that there is an Istanbul Convention. And I said, yes, I know, but I think you're the first taxi driver I ever met who knows that the Istanbul Convention exists. So that shows that even in those countries where it's really hard to come forward, there is knowledge and there is awareness about what's going on in these countries. And yes, of course, I tried a lot that Turkey does not, but it was not successful, does not leave the convention. We managed so far that Poland, who wanted to introduce an alternative convention, which is on the rights of the family, was not successful. Of course, they have sympathies from Croatia, from Slovakia, from other countries, but so far they didn't manage to start to make a process for a new international convention. And this convention is really against all what my values are looking like. And what, of course, I did a lot, and not so much me, but EPF as an organization. We really focus on those organizations who are doing this, who are orchestrating this backlash. And we published 4 different publications, booklets, starting with the Agenda Europe, and bringing, disclosing what forces are there in Europe active when it comes to trying to orchestrate this backlash. And the latest publication, and the first one, the Agenda Europe, there is also a TV documentation from Arte, which you can find on their website. And the last publication was the tip of the iceberg, which all these publications you can find on the homepage of EPF, epfweb.org, I think. And the tip of the iceberg focuses on the money that comes to the European Union from, first of all, the US, second, the Russia and the Kremlin especially, and third, the third source is the European sources itself. And it shows that within 10 years, about $700 million, it's just what we see, what we know, what is official, more or less. So it's really the tip of the iceberg, because we have no idea about many flows that are done in a different way. But there is a lot of money coming into the European Union trying to force this anti-rights agenda. It's very often connected with the so-called fathers' rights movement. It's very often connected with anti-LGBTIQ and anti-abortion and anti-self-determination of women movements. And yes, we have a very close look at that. I think that we really have them on our radar, and maybe it's a success, I don't know, but I think it is a success, because Agenda Europe, after we disclosed what her program is and what they are doing and what they want politically, they recently renamed themselves into Vision Network. But we will also focus on Vision Network, not only on Agenda Europe. So however they are called, we will follow them and their activities. And that's important. It's so important to know what your enemy is doing. So of course we don't have the money, we don't have the sources that they have, but we have a good network.
Yeah, they're very well funded, aren't they?
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a look at the atlas that the EPF published. Very fascinating, especially the abortion atlas. And what was striking was there was some dark green countries, which is great, some light green countries, but then also red, orange, dark red countries. So there seems to be a great difference between European countries. How can the EPF or the European Union in general ensure that there's a same minimal standard, a bare minimum for reproductive rights in all of the European countries? Which initiatives can be taken for that?
It's not that easy. I don't know whether you are aware, about 15 years ago, Edith Estrella, she was a member of the European Parliament at this time. She drafted the Estrella report, which was the first report at the European Union focusing on SRHR. And it was a disaster, because all these anti-movements really tried to bump this report. And at the end, there was a wrong decision. So the numbers of votings were counted not in a correct way, and there were substantive errors in translation in some languages. And at the very end, the Estrella report was not adopted. even if there have been enough votes, but there was a manipulation on how this voting took place. And now 2 years ago, Fred Matic, he's a Croatian, MEP. He wrote a new report, and even if it was not easy, and the conservatives forced him to do some concessions, it was adopted, and it is a very good report. The problem is that the European Union doesn't have competence in health issues and in these issues. And we all were said hooray when France took the presidency and Macron announced that he wants that the right to abortion should become part of the social how is it called in English?
Social fabric or social
the social charter, the social charter of the European Union.
Oh yeah.
But at the end, it was an announcement, and then nothing happened at all after it. But that, for instance, would have been a huge step forward, but it never happened. And I think it's not that easy because you know that member countries are quite sensitive when it comes to their national priorities. Yeah. But of course, when the ban of abortion is very much linked, like in Poland, for instance, to the functioning of the judiciary and the functioning of courts and of the independence of courts, and in Poland it's obviously not the case, then you also have some entry points where you can try to really change, make changes. And I really am very hopeful that now, after the Polish elections and with the new Polish government and the new Polish majority at the National Assembly or in both chambers, I hope that we can really make a change also in Poland, which does not mean that we come further in Hungary or in Slovakia, where it seems to become, I don't know, after this election, but there are no good signs at the moment. So we still have some countries where we really have to work very, very hard, and where many wrong information, for instance, about the Istanbul Convention or abortion as such, as a health issue, is still around. And it's
we saw as well Malta, Andorra, and San Marino were
Zero.
Also there, and they're all very small. So is there something to do with the fact that they're so small, there's no facilities, or can you tell us about why that is? Or
I think that in all the three, it's more or less, when you compare these three countries you mentioned, in all of these three countries the Catholic Church plays a very, very important role. For instance, in Andorra there is an equilibrium between the Archbishop of Spain and I think the French president. They have together a saying somehow in Andorra, and the Archbishop obviously is not amused in any progress when it comes to SRHR. In Malta, there are some MPs and MEPs who are really trying to work on abortion issues, and they recently make a slightly change, but it was really a mini step.
Just because of the news they got when there was an American woman who went there and then she couldn't get an abortion, she nearly died, and only because there was an American woman, they got all the news, they made this tiny change.
Really tiny. And San Marino, wasn't it in San Marino? I think there was a referendum in favor of abortion, if I remember right, maybe 3 years ago or so. So I didn't follow up, but I think in San Marino that there was progress, but I really have to follow up, as I said. But there was a referendum, and it was fine.
On that, I've got a quite controversial question to ask. Do you think a referendum on abortion should only women be allowed to vote, or should men also be allowed to vote on abortion rights?
That's a good question. I think from our constitutions, it wouldn't be possible to exclude men, because you also cannot exclude in those countries where it's only men who have to serve at the army. You also cannot exclude women to vote about army issues. So it's always a referendum of the whole population. And from my juridical heart, I think that's okay. From my feminist heart, I would say, yes, of course, you should think about that. But in practice, I would be very careful on dividing population in such issues.
Our first event of this term was on decriminalising abortion in the UK, or sorry, in Britain, because it's different in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. But one of our speakers who was from Ireland said, I wouldn't recommend doing a referendum. We had to do it because it was the only way to change our constitution, because it was written into the Irish constitution. And she was talking about mechanisms that are the best at doing this sort of change, whether it's legislation, international conventions, referenda, judiciary, and legal rulings, and what the basis of legal rulings are. Do you have any opinion on what makes the best long-lasting change, what's hardest to overturn, what you think has worked best in countries where there's been a change?
Yeah, I think that totally depends on the country. Yeah. And I think that in Ireland you only had the chance to change that because of the as it was part of the constitution. In other countries where I think that's really a huge hurdle. Yeah. And even if we know, if I can just speak about Austria, I know that in Austria, between 70 and 80% of the population say, yes, of course, an abortion should be legal and safe and no problem with that. But I really would be not so sure whether not it wouldn't be the far right and the anti-movement who would manage to mobilize much more than those who say, yes, of course, it should be legal. Why should we change that? Yeah. So I wouldn't like to have a referendum on that in Austria, for instance, even if I know that the vast majority is in favor. But who knows who attends such a referendum at the end if you do not have to have one. So we always try to also fight any civil how do you call it, petitions and civil movements, civic movements that they come to parliament and asking, for instance, for statistics and evidence and what's the reason for abortion, because it's not covered by our insurance system. And so why, if there is no public money involved, if it's just you pay it yourself as a woman, yeah, and why should I give my dates for a statistics? That's only from my point of view, or from our point of view, that's only a step to make it more complicated and to build barriers for women which you have in some countries, that you have an obligatory counseling before you really can make up a date or things like that. And whoever makes the counseling, that could be also make women doubtful about their own decisions. And so I really would say it's up to the situation of countries. I know that in Poland, for instance, I was told that also there 70% of people are in favor. So maybe in Poland, where it's really an issue and where it was an issue again during the elections, if you make a referendum there, that would maybe be helpful, because then you have a clear decision of the Polish people with a clear turnout, yeah, and maybe even if some years later there comes a conservative coalition again, you can say, okay, forget it, that's done, we decided about it. So I think you really have to look from country to country what's the best and what's the circumstances. It's very difficult.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I know that you also have been the foreign policy spokesperson for the Social Democrats. So we wanted to ask something just about that as well, because we noticed that you've been drawing a lot of attention to wars that aren't in the media at the moment. So Myanmar, Nagorno-Karabakh, and the EU kind of needing to keep an eye on these, even though they're not at the forefront of our minds in the moment. So how do you do that, basically? Because it seems like as soon as the world's attention is on something, you get the support, but then it goes off, and then what happens afterwards? How can the help be sustainable?
That's a totally good question, and I'm afraid I don't have a good answer to that. Because, for instance, from my point of view, because I have some personal relations. For me, the military coup in Myanmar was a disaster, and I really was very active on that. And now it's nearly 2.5 years later, and it fades away from media, it fades away from everything. And even if you look to Ukraine, we have the clash in the Middle East now for more than 3 weeks, and Ukraine, the war in Ukraine is more or less forgotten, and it's not in the focus of media anymore. And I think that's really one of the challenges that we face, how not to forget all these frozen conflicts, and these conflicts who are not do not have the total media attendance all the time, and how we still can also, because I think that's really important, give people there the feeling that we have forgotten about them, that we have not forgotten about people. And I can do that via my personal channels to Myanmar, and I have it happens that a very high-ranking Austrian is at the UN in Myanmar, is there, and we exchange information. But for other conflicts like Yemen or there are so many others. Look at Ethiopia and Tigray and others. It's so easily forgotten, and it's also hard to. It doesn't make a sense to make a press release on all of these conflicts every day, because nobody will listen to it, nobody will follow it. So I think that you really should, then and when, with a special audience or a special location, you really should focus on what's happening. So just to give you an example, I will be at on a panel discussion mid-November on the due diligence ideas that are coming to really, during the whole chain of production chain, really to respect human rights and to respect environmental rights. And there, for instance, I think you very well can merge these due diligence issues with Myanmar, because of course the military in Myanmar is an industrial factor in Myanmar, and they are producing a lot, which also comes to the European market. And with issues like that, and of course they do not respect human rights. And with issues like, so with different topics, you can try to bring in some of the conflicts that seem to be forgotten or fade away somehow, and to keep them on the agenda. But it's not easy.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. I've got one last question. After that, we'll go to the Zoom floor for questions. So please get your questions ready. But especially speaking about global development and aiding countries that we might consider underdeveloped or not as developed. How have you been able to support grassroots movements, local movements, and kind of implement sustainable development without having this unequal relationship that might be constructed as white saviorism?
Yeah, that's also there are many possibilities how you can do that. For instance, I very regularly meet NGO representatives from especially Latin America and Africa when they are in Europe and have a stopover in Austria. Then I try to meet them, and I try to understand their problems, and also try to involve them in my political work, to mention them, to make written questions, or to make whatever political tools we have, and use that. On the other hand, whenever I am traveling to other countries, I try to have meetings with such grassroots organizations, and very often you can find an Austrian NGO that is active in whatever country in this world. And as I have a very good relation to Austrian NGOs in the development world, when they know that I go to whatever, Brazil or Mexico, whatever, they say, you should meet this or that person. I said, yes, let us connect and I will meet him or her. And we then also do that, and not just me, I force the whole delegation to meet with them. And so I think that one thing that I slowly manage in the Austrian parliament is that the awareness about the problem of indigenous people is raising, especially when it comes to the Amazon, where they are really totally under pressure. And so that I think that works quite well. And it's so easy. To be honest, it's so easy to get in contact with grassroots organizations, and they're everywhere. And I remember when I was the first time in Brazil, it was in Rio +20, the Rio +20 conference. I was in contact with, again, I don't know the English name of the organization, Gesellschaft für bedrohte Völker, Association for Endangered Peoples, but I don't know whether it's really the official translation. And they made a contact with indigenous people in Brazil, and I was at this time I was also active in environmental issues, and they say that I was the first who brought together senators from Brazil and representatives of indigenous in one room. And we had a conversation, and I think it's crazy that you need an Austrian to come to Brazil to bring them together. But I even met somebody last May who was there at this meeting, and she said, yes, it was really the very first time that they met. Yeah. So yeah, great. When I managed to bring them together, that's fine. But I really do not understand why in such a huge country like Brazil, they need support from outside. They could do it themselves for sure. And meanwhile, they are doing it. No need anymore to bring people together there.
I guess sometimes it takes an outside perspective to help the inside.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for your very insightful answers. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? Yes, Tony, go for it.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tony Antonia. First of all, I should say greetings, schöne Grüße from my father, Gerald Netzel.
Ah!
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say I know another Netzel, but
yes.
Okay, now you know him too, yeah.
Yes, I do. Second thing, so I'm kind of wondering what your strategy would be, or if you have any recommendations, how we can make women's topic societal topics, because even in this little Zoom call here, I think we have mainly female identifying people. And when you brought up the comparison with the military service, which is kind of viewed as some societal thing, so women are allowed to vote, and therefore, yeah, men should vote on abortion rights too, but still in the discussion of it and the view of society, I so often feel that it's a women's thing, so I don't really have to engage. And what we could do on a daily basis also without getting aggressive or frustrated.
I know, totally important. I think we cannot change the world without men. We need them desperately because they're half of us, and us alone we will not make the big change in a sustainable way. And indeed, first of all, I think, for instance, that it's so important, and there are more and more men who are aware of that. Violence against women is a male problem mainly. Yeah, so it's them who should start, and there are more and more men who are aware of that, and that's really very good. And we recently had a steering committee for a conference which will take place in May in Norway. It's organized by EPF, or by our global branch, which is GPA. And there we will bring together about 200 MPs from all over the world, focusing on sexual and reproductive rights. And as I recently had invited to my political party meeting in my district, in our women's meeting in Favoriten, a representative from men, which is an organization that works with men who were perpetrators, or also focus on men's health, because it's crazy that men are dying much earlier than women because they do not take care so much about themselves in a medical perspective. And to talk about men's health and what are their concrete challenges might be something that can be a good way to engage men also in the fight against violence against women. And Romeo Bisutti, who is the one that I invited, and he's working for men for many years. He, for instance, has a focus group of religious leaders, mostly Muslim leaders, and he started to work with them on male issues, on male health issues. And then when there is a group and when they have built trust towards each other, then he started also to speak about female genital mutilation and about roles of male and female roles and stereotypes and other things, which you can do if you find a good entry point. And as I had the steering committee in 1 week and I met Romeo on Monday after, I thought, okay, let's invite Romeo to our conference and really offer a man-only session about men's health and men's possible role in SRHR. And I think that's also important for men, that they have a space where they can talk among themselves. I think it's also for men like my father, who is 80 soon. It's not easy to find himself in a totally new role, which when he was grown up, he never learned that also men are taking care for children or for housework or for care work in general. And I think it's also important for men of his age and others to reflect on what is the new normal, yeah, and what is maybe violence when I'm even in my words, in my language, when I'm violent against my wife and when not. So I think it's also important for men to have a safe space to reflect on issues like that. And I think that will bring us forward.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe, well, if someone else wants to ask a question, I'll leave the floor. Otherwise, I have a follow-up.
Yeah, is there anybody else who would like to ask something, or? Okay, well, yes, okay, we'll go with you then, Philip.
Yeah, it's in. I'm gonna. Is it muted? Okay, we're in the same room, just to explain. I mean, I've an enormous amount of questions, but I'm just gonna ask one, which I thought about when I invited you actually, and which Helen and Kat and I discussed. You are a member of parliament for the Social Democrats. And when I think, of course, about social democracy, what we all think about is addressing mainly socioeconomic injustices, or injustices that combine problems of financial and economic problems with social justice. So I was wondering, how does this side of your sort of political background play into the way that you address issues in sexual and reproductive rights? And what kind of a dimension, what kind of a socioeconomic dimension is there to this problem in Europe and wherever you do your work?
Yeah, I think there is a huge link, because especially poor people, men and women likewise, lack access to knowledge, lack access to services when it comes to health in general, but especially when it comes to sexual and reproductive health services. We see it there is not only men, which I quoted with Romeo, there's also FEN, and they really have a lot of services that are in several languages, in the mother tongues of women in this case, trying to give them the information they need, because especially foreigners, especially migrants, especially people with not high education are doing it totally hard to really understand the system, where you can get support, where you can get the possibility to have to get vaccines and whatever. Yeah, it's really, it's for everything more or less. And also we see that as it's a private issue in Austria, and you pay for an abortion between 600 and 850 euros. If you cannot afford it, and that's really, yes, I see your face, it's true, it's really, really expensive. And there are some funds for people who cannot afford it, for women who cannot afford it. But how do they know about that fund? Because if you can imagine, if you are not able to raise 800 euros for an abortion, how should you raise 80,000 euros afterwards for bringing up a child? That's even much more expensive than to decide not to become pregnant, or not to get to give birth to a child. And it's totally crazy, because these funds that exist, if it's empty, then it's over. So if you are at the end of a month, maybe that you need financial support for an abortion, you don't have any chance to get it. And that's ridiculous. And I think we are the 4th richest country in Europe. Yeah. And to make people dependent on funds, and not on an insurance system where everybody else in Europe has either. We do not have neither contraceptions, not abortions. You have to pay both from your private pocket in Austria. And so I think it's totally related. And social exclusion means exclusion of all services, and means exclusion of whatever. For some people, also that what we managed to build on social protection schemes during the last century, they simply do not have access to it, because they simply don't know it. And there you can have a big impact when you focus on these people and try to deliver services also to those.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Or if
Very,
anyone
very
has
short.
one, then for
Very answer.
Antonia's follow-up, or
Yeah, Tony, if you want to go again, then we'd appreciate it.
Just with, like, I think your point of giving men kind of a hold in, or a group in, is really, really important. But what I find a bit scary recently is this surge of like really anti-women influencers on TikTok and YouTube, and how easy young boys get sucked into that very, very early, because before they can reflect on the content. So like Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson. And if there is some tactic or strategy that is being discussed, how to counteract that.
Yeah, that's not so much me, because I'm not on TikTok, to be honest. I'm still on Facebook and things like that. But of course, there are organizations like the AIDS AIDS Help Vienna, and others who also really use these modern tools and modern channels to really reach young people in the way they are used to consume information. And of course, we face really huge problems when it comes to pornography. And I do not say that pornography is the evil of everything, not at all. Yeah, I think it's fine. But the question is, what does it make with a young person if he or she thinks that what's happening in a porn is the usual way of having sex, which is usually not the way. Yeah. And what pressure and what expectations do they have towards themselves and their partners or future partners? So I think that there is still a lot to do in schools, in formal education, when it comes to how to consume media and how to consume information there, and what you can trust or what you cannot trust, and what is good for me and for myself. And so I think that it's so important, and it's a disaster. That the public debate about it is a disaster. But I really think that it should start in kindergarten, that kids get information about what is their body, what does it make with them, where shall they say no, stop, I do not want that, where can they say also to an adult, hey, no, stop, I don't want that. Yeah, so really to give young people the confidence in themselves, to avoid sexual assault in the very end, and that they really get a sense and an idea about how satisfying sexuality really looks for them. And it's not a sport where you have to be the highest, quickest and most loud or whatever, yeah. But really to learn that people have the confidence to trust in themselves to say what they like and what they don't like. That's a challenge. You cannot start early enough to train that and to give that confidence, I think.
And that's the importance of sex education.
And that's why movements like the AfD in Germany scare me. They kind of advocate against Frühsexualisierung, early sexualization, and they try to ban sex education, I think, before the age of 12.
Yeah, which is when already so many things are already happening.
Yeah.
We have one very last quick fire question, if we may, which was, we just wanted to ask you what movements give you hope, what political movements are giving you hope, to end on a nice note.
Yeah, there are many. I'm also somehow involved in IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, and there were also regional chapters until some years, and every chapter and even now all the structure have youth representatives, and they are so great, and I admire them and their power and their vision, their visionarity. Yeah, they. I work together with a young French woman, Alice Ackermann, a French Jew from Strasbourg, who worked with Jewish communities, and even in Jewish in Orthodox Jewish communities, it's not easy with sexuality. And Alice made so. I saw her when I learned her to know when she was 19, and I'm in contact until today, and it's so great to see how much impact she still has, not only when it comes to her own peers, but also to really hard to very not easy organizations like, for instance, Orthodox Jews or others. That gives me hope that there is so much power, so much vision, and so much trust in themselves that it's really adorable. I like them. And the one of the biggest compliments I ever got in my life was when Alice couldn't attend a meeting. Then you can give the voice to somebody else, and she said I should speak with her voice, and that was great.
That's beautiful. No, that's
you want to
great.
finish it up?
Yeah, thank you so much for this. It was really great to hear about your experience, your opinions, your wishes for the future, and what inspires you. Thank you to everyone who attended. And yes, you want to say any last words?
No, just thank you so much. And yeah, I think we might do some write-up or something about the event so that more people can see the what's going on today.
If you can mute yourself for a second. One last word from me. I'm going to do this in German. Frau Abgeordnete, vielen herzlichen Dank, dass Sie sich Zeit genommen haben. War wundervoll. Wenn Sie jemals aus irgendeinem Grund im Vereinigten Königreich sind und in der Nähe, Sie haben eine E-Mail-Adresse, schreiben Sie mir eine E-Mail und wir zeigen Ihnen Cambridge und machen das Programm, was wir jetzt nicht machen können. Es wird uns sehr freuen. Und danke nochmal.
Sehr, sehr gerne. Vielen lieben Dank für die Einladung. Thank you very much for having me, and I really enjoyed it. All the best to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Nice. Have a nice evening. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.